you get thank you like that, probably a pretty special thank you, because aren't very many people that owe you that debt that'll just come up and say that. We're glad to have been there to do that for you. I say that from the heart for all of us. He doesn't need any introduction, so I won't.
That was the best introduction I've ever heard. Brevity is the speed of life. It's great to be here always with all of you. It's a special friendship that we have, and I'm particularly glad to see so many guys like Rick Atchison that I flew with, Howie Pearson, all my buds from NKP. I'm really glad to see we've got some guys here, Nomex. Imagine that. A couple young A-10 drivers over here flying the best airplane in the Air Force. Is that right? Paid political advertisement. Got the best job in the Air Force. Captain on flight status, imagine that. And I can only hope that back in our days, we were at least as good looking as these guys. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about Southeast Asia. Great presentation that we just had. The general kind of brought a couple things home here. Let me point out what he was talking about here. This is a map of Southeast Asia, pilot's view, okay? Third dimension, that's what we did. We worked from the third dimension. And when we talk about the Vietnam War, that's really kind of a misnomer. In fact, when I talk about it, I don't talk about the war in Vietnam. I talk about the war in Southeast Asia. Because while most Americans who served over there served over here in Vietnam, the reality is the conflict that we were involved in was merely one chapter in a longer war that swept across all of Southeast Asia for many, many, many years, beyond and before us, okay? And as airmen, we were involved in all of these areas. I put in airstrikes in northern Laos. I put in airstrikes up down around Dong Ho. I hit the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I did airstrikes in Cambodia. I did airstrikes in Southeast Asia. Because air power can go anywhere. It doesn't respect boundaries. It can go where you need it to do. And so that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. I want to talk about this thing out here that ran down through Laos called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I think this is the key event of the war. The general said that Douglas Pike in his writings talked about the Battle of An Loc, which is down here, as being the key battle of the war. I see it a little bit differently. I think the key battle of this war took place right here in southern Laos. This is the key terrain. If you own southern Laos and you control it as the North Vietnamese did, you can move your forces in any direction, and that's exactly what their strategy was, and that's what we're going to talk about. And the key battle that occurred, in my opinion, in this war took place right here at a place called Chapone in 1971. Now, if you take your fingers, if you can do this, we'll try to do this. Okay, we got Hanoi up here in the north. You put your other finger down here on Saigon and you draw a line straight through. About halfway down is this place called Chapone. And that is where, in my opinion, the key battle of the war took place. So that's why I want to talk about the Ho Chi Minh Trail, because it's so key to this war. And we forward air controllers, we were very involved in this. Throughout the war, we tried to use air power to control the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It didn't work. It was a failure, and that's a fact. It wasn't because of our efforts. It was because it was the wrong weapon. The general talked about being in a bunker down here in An Loc, which is right there, 40 miles from Saigon. He's being engaged by North Vietnamese tanks. Where do you think they came from? They came from China, Russia, down through here, down along the trails, all the way down through there, got to there. At any place, if we could have found them, we would have destroyed them. But we couldn't find them. They were that good. And he engaged them down here in this battle right there. I think that says it all right there, the scope of our failure. But throughout the war, we brought in our air power, primarily in Vietnam, also over here in Thailand. And forward air controllers, we were the pointy end of that stick. We had bases at places like Nakhon Phanom with the 23rd task. We also had detachments down here at Ubon. We had the 20th task down here at Da Nang. They were flying out of all kinds of forward locations, attacking the trail from the east. We came over from the west. Down here we had the 19th task flying the OB-10s and O2s, hitting the southern extremists down here in Cambodia. And of course we had forward locations up here with special forces. They were going in and doing quite a bit. So our attempts to shut down the trail was very extensive. The North Vietnamese realized early on that if they were going to take over the south, they had to get stuff down there. And this was one of their main conduits to do it. They started in 1960. The operation was run by a group called Group 559, and they were pretty good at what they did. One big slide. I'm sorry, I apologize for this, straight from Air Command and Staff College. But this is, I got to show you the algebra of all of this. The war against the trail. Us, U.S., all our allies, South Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand, they were all on our side. Them was the North Vietnamese and the Soviet Union and China and all the communist bloc, giving them all kinds of goods. Our objectives over there throughout the conflict primarily was to stop infiltration from the north. We wanted to get out. Kind of sounds like today, doesn't it? And South Vietnam, of course, they wanted to survive. It was a defensive mission. The North Vietnamese, they wanted to unify North Vietnam under their control. That was their offensive and strategic objective. That's what they were trying to accomplish. The geography of the region was such that Laos was the middle of all of this. Well, we solved the problem of Laos in 1962. President Kennedy signed a treaty that declared it neutral. Problem solved. Political solution to the problem. Only problem was nobody observed that neutrality. The problem was that the enemy immediately moved in there and began to exploit it. We realized what they were doing, but it precluded us from using our big main Army units like the 4th Infantry Division and the 1st Cav from going in there and shutting down that trail. If you want to keep your enemy from using a piece of real estate, you've got to physically do that. You can't necessarily do that with air power. It's a lesson we had learned in World War I, World War II, Korea, and we forgot it here. We tried to use other methods. So what we did in our moves to stop the infiltration, we decided we would use air power and special forces. The SAW guys, they were out there. And many of our FACs that flew, guys like Gary Dickers, Mike FACs, they flew with the special forces teams out there and did the best job that they could. And it was quite a battle that we waged. Over at where I was, in KP, Thailand, here it is. This is our home away from home. We carved it out of the jungle, and I understand it's gone back to the jungle. But right here at the north end of the, or the south end of the airfield, which was the important end, that's where all the FACs were down here. This was our place. And then we were bunkered over here and had our hoorah and had a good, it was a good life as young guys over there. In fact, we kept that base running until 1975. And there's our patch. We were called initially the Cricket FACs, and then the Gombe FACs, and then we became the Nail FACs, and that became our unofficial patch. We're going to change that. It'll take a little work there. And here's one of our first FACs going out on a mission to do his thing. Somebody sent me this. I don't know who this person is. I'd like to know myself, but he's getting ready to go out on a mission over the Ho Chi Minh Trail and do his thing out there. And that was our first aircraft, the Intrepid 01. 95 knots in a dive on a good day with a clean aircraft. You do all kinds of things with it. I turned it into a gunship one day, had a guy in the back seat with an M60. He fired off the side. We were throwing hand grenades out. Went out one day and decided I was going to be on a PSYOPs mission that day, and I was going to throw out leaflets. So I'm flying along, having a good time, throwing out all these leaflets, and I forgot that behind me is the tail of the airplane. And when I went then to try to climb up, pull back on the stick, nothing happened because the whole tail of the airplane was covered with leaflets. Made for a very interesting landing. And here's a good tight shot of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This was taken by Bill Tilton, who was one of the first 01 nail FACs over there. You can see quite a bit here. The way they initially developed the road, it was just nothing but a dirt road. And as you can see, we tried to destroy the dirt road, and it's very hard to destroy a dirt road because you can just go right around it. And here you can see now the enemy's moved in. They've built a little fording point down here across one of the rivers. We bombed the hell out of it trying to get it. But you can see the enemy's in here now. They're building bunkers, gun pits down here. They obviously wanted to defend this. And over the years that the Ho Chi Minh Trail existed, it became one of the most heavily defended areas in the entire world. In fact, there were areas where the United States Air Force could not go. We don't like to admit that, but it's true. When I flew over there in '72, there were whole big red areas on our maps. Don't go there because there's too many guns. You don't have air superiority when you've got things like that on your map. And we lost it to the guns and the all the heavy air defenses there. One of our primary offensive weapons were guys like these, the air commandos initially flying things like A-26s, A-1s right here. Great machine. They took off, flew for a long time. Their limiting factor was not fuel, it was oil. They would take off with like 21 gallons of oil. And when the oil sump light would come on, then they had to go land. These guys are very fortunate because they will readily admit that if the North Vietnamese had ever developed an oil-seeking missile, they would have been in really, really big trouble. In fact, the last one that was shot down was flown by a young lieutenant by the name of Lance Smith, who's now General Lance Smith, and he's the Joint Forces Commander down at in Virginia, the last serving A-1 pilot on active duty. We upgraded our force here, of course, our FAC force. We introduced the Intrepid 01, which I guess was actually kind of built around the radios. I just discovered that. Somebody said that earlier. Interesting point. This one was assigned to the 20th TAS. See the little covey on the tail there, and that's their patch down there. And we used these from about 1967 until about 1971, and a lot of guys in this room flew that airplane. A lot of war stories there. Of course, the enemy air defenses, SA-2 missiles. By 1972, late 71, actually 72, these were showing up along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, buttressed with lots and lots of guns. My first mission I got over there, I was up over Ban Karai Pass with a guy by the name of Gary Willis, and we had a 100mm gun open up on us, and that's a really, really big airburst. My second mission, I was actually hit by a 23mm shell, did not go off. Fortunately, we were able to fly the airplane home, put it on the ground. After those two missions, I thought, wow, that's going to be a long year. And then these guys show up, okay, and then we started losing airplanes to these. They shot down a Spectre gunship one night, blew them out of the sky. No survivors. They brought those bodies home not too long ago, but this is what we were dealing with. And when you're flying around in an airplane that's mostly plexiglass, and these are operating, you want to hear some interesting war stories. Grab Rick Atchison and ask him about dodging SA-2 missiles in an OV-10 during the BAT-2 SAR. Tremendous stories. And then we introduced the OV-10. There it is. This one flown by the 19th TAS down out of Benoit. But we use these all over the theater, and this one's carrying the standard combat load. You can see here he's got his 230-gallon tank on here, and he's got a pod of rockets, probably another one on the other side. And here, the ever-dangerous 30mm M60 machine gun, which was good for nothing except making noise. At the altitudes at which we had to operate, it got guys in trouble because they'd go down too low and try to stay straight, which was a dumb thing to do. But those were introduced in 1968, and we flew them right up until the end of 1975. In fact, in the last action of the war, NAOFAC's flying OV-10s were right over the top of the Maya Gez, and that's a great piece of history. And this is one of our main helpers here, the ever-dangerous F-4 Phantom, with a standard load of bombs. This guy was a summer helper, showed up in the summer of 72, came over from Holloman, hence the hoe on the tail there, and that's about what they were worth. This guy's carrying Mark 82s here. You can see the bombs. These here, those are daisy cutters, fuse extenders. Drop the bomb hits the ground, goes off above the ground, gives you a better frag pattern. It's better for soft targets like trucks, supplies, and people. Very effective weapon. Also right here, he's carrying an ALQ-87 electronic jamming pod specifically designed to jam those surface-to-air missile sites. This was really the beginning of electronic warfare as we know it today. So in this one picture, we've got quite a bit. But these guys would show up all the time. We had several wings of them over there, and normally their standard load was 12 of those Mark 82 bombs, and they did a lot of work for us. In 1971, late 1971, our squadron, the 23rd TAS, we had 15 of our OV-10s modified, as you see here, into what we call the paved nail configuration. We took our airplanes and we put some really sophisticated equipment on there, sophisticated for its time. We put a laser designator pod on here. We brought in guys like Rick Atchison and a bunch of other dudes who were really smart guys, and they figured out how to make this thing work. This system here initially was designed for finding things on the ground, but it could also laser a target with a laser beam, and then we could then drop a bomb that would fly precisely to that point. It's a revolution in precision warfare. You see this today. This is absolute standard today. But this was the very beginning. And then we took, and we also put on the airplane a LORAN long-range navigational device. That's the antenna back there. and it gave us a more precise way of navigating and finding things on the ground. In fact, when we tied the two systems together and started getting the systems to talk to each other, we discovered that in many cases the maps that we were using were inaccurate. So that created a whole other series of problems. But this was the beginning of the precision revolution that you see so much today. We also found that it was tremendously applicable in search and rescue operations. And our squadron become heavily involved in doing those kind of operations, and brought a lot of guys home using this technology. Today, of course, we've got what they call the lightning pod and the sniper pods and all those things. And anytime you see those really sophisticated videos on TV of guided bombs, this was the first generation of all of that. And it was really, for us just there, given these airplanes, we didn't realize what it was we were dealing with until later on when we saw where it all ended up. So it's tremendous. This is a revolution in military affairs right here. And of course, our biggest weapon were the B-52s, the arc light strikes. Targeted a lot of these while I was over there. This is a B-52 strike going in. Normally, when the B-52s came in, they operated in cells of 3. Each one of them carried 106 of those bombs that I just showed you. The targeting box for a B-52 strike was 1 kilometer by 2 kilometers. And when those bombs just start rippling through there, you would do a tremendous amount of destruction. And we put those all over Southeast Asia. In fact, North Vietnamese writings later on talked about that was the weapon that they most feared, because it was just absolutely devastating. And we had guys doing off Special Ops Air Force too. This is Terry Pfaff. Terry was a Raven FAC up in the north. This is post-flight now. He's enjoying an adult beverage here, doing his thing, decompressing a little bit. But the Raven FACs primarily, we operated on the peripheries of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We worked more in support of direct with the indigenous forces in the area, but even we got involved in some of that too. And of course, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was really nothing more than a dirt road, although it was a huge complex of dirt roads. This is in fact not the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but I took this picture, or I got it here, just to show you what a dirt road looks like from the lower part and how difficult it is to destroy something like that, because if you bomb it here, then you just go around it. Now this is a very interesting piece of geography. Those guys, those of you who flew over there south of Pleiku might remember this mountain. Some guys seem to think that it has some similarity with part of the female anatomy. I won't go there. I will say, though, that there was a crashed airplane right up inside, and yes, it was a forward air controller. And here's the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It wasn't really a trail. It was a whole series of roads and cutoffs and crossovers and everything else. And I forget which particular point this was, but you can see how massive it was and how many bombs we dropped on there. And who knows what's up here in these caves and supplies and all kinds of stuff. And of course, every river fording points, just so many things to hit, and we attacked it all. Now, back to the map. Let me talk a little bit more about the war. By 1971, General Abrams, or 1970 actually, General Abrams realized that if he was going to be able to protect South Vietnam, which was what our defensive mission, from the aggressors from the north, he had to isolate the two countries. And so he used his naval forces out here to shut off flow of any enemy supplies down over the water, Operation Market Garden, and then he sent his forces into Cambodia and cleaned out all of this. And I'm sure a lot of you guys were involved in those kind of operations. And that left one last conduit, which was the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And he realized that if we're gonna win this war, if we're gonna isolate South Vietnam so they can defend themselves, we've got to stop the flow of supplies from the north. And they come down through places like Mugia Pass and Ban Karai Pass, and down through Chapon, and then down through in the Ah Shaw Valley in southern, down to a place down here called the Man's Head was a primary location, and down here. These base areas down here, and then they would infiltrate the supplies into the south here or down through Cambodia, and we had to staunch that supply. And so General Abrams realized that with that one last conduit, we were bombing the trail now very heavily. In fact, prior to the bombing halt in 1968 up north, we were flying 4,700 sorties a month along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Sorties, one mission, one time, one aircraft, one time. But when we stopped flying the missions into North Vietnam, we turned all that air power onto the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and we plussed that up. We were flying 12,800 sorties a month, dropping bombs on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, like that F-4 that you saw. In fact, during the entire war that we were over there, we dropped 2 million tons of bombs on Laos, primarily southern Laos. Laos is the second most bombed country ever. The first most bombed country, of course, was South Vietnam, where we dropped 4 million tons of ordnance on there. And I'm not talking about all the artillery and hand grenades and everything else in the Agent Orange that we dropped. South Vietnam is the most bombed country in the history of ever. It's incredible. And those bombs are still going off. Anyway, General Abrams realizes now that he's got a strategic problem. He's got to isolate the South from the North. He's got to do something about the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Air power's not doing the job. Because again, if you want to block a road, if you want to block a piece of territory, you've got to put forces there. He can't send in U.S. forces, although he was doing it covertly, but never with enough strength to do that. In fact, we've got some guys here. Gary Dickers flew support for those guys. Blaster, where are you? Bill Shelton, he led the detachment of Army guys here at the Confidant called Heavy Hook, and he spent time incredibly walking the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He's one of my personal heroes, I'll tell you. Incredible stuff. General Abrams realizes, though, he's got to block this road. Well, what does he have? Well, he just spent the last 2.5 years building up the South Vietnamese military. They used to be a joke, you know, and many people, when they write about them, they talk about them to this day, they talk about the South Vietnamese military in very, very bad terms. But I'm here to tell you, by 71, 72, when I was over there fighting, they'd gotten pretty good. Why? Because they had to fight. They had no other choice. And so he gets the South Vietnamese leaders to agree to putting forth a force into Chapone of South Vietnamese forces to block the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And this became the great Battle of Lam Son 719. And of course, when they went in there with lots and lots of air support. Any FACs in here flew Lam Son? Yeah, you betcha. It's a tremendous operation. Unfortunately, the North Vietnamese realized that if they lost this battle, they would lose the war. So they threw everything they had at this. And at the point where things really came to a head, when they actually put forces into Chapone, the South Vietnamese leaders decided they'd taken too many casualties and they decided to pull out, gave that trail back to the North Vietnamese. And the next season, in late 71, early 72, under what we call the Commando Hunt campaigns that we ran with air power against the trail, that was the hottest, most dangerous campaign ever, because the North Vietnamese were once again flooding the trail with supplies coming south to launch the great offensives that General Ulmer just talked about, where in 1972 they attacked down here through Dong Ha, Quang Tri, through the middle of the country around Con Tum, Pleiku, and down here in the south, and they became very rich targets for all of us forward air controllers. And I mean, we were blowing up convoys their time. But the fact was, we had lost the battle for the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and that's the historical fact. Air power couldn't do it. It was the wrong weapon. Later on, after we pulled out, we had not left the South Vietnamese with the equipment and organization that they needed to attack the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So by 1973, 74, and 75, after we had left, the trail was unassailable. It became a super highway, in some cases 4 lanes wide, all weather, bringing those supplies north. So that in 1975, when the North Vietnamese came south to attack, this time they brought 22 divisions that moved down into the south, linked up with the local roads, and in fact the North Vietnamese built another parallel road inside South Vietnam right down through this area here, and it gave them all the strategic mobility that they needed to move their forces to overwhelm the South in 1975 and win the war. Now, to this day, the North Vietnamese have never openly acknowledged the fact that they had violated the neutrality of Laos during the war by building this series of roads. In fact, what they do, if you go there and you say, I'd like to see the Ho Chi Minh Trail, they take you to that last road that they built down here. Always deception. North Vietnamese, masters of deception. And that's what we were dealing with. So all the things that we did, here's another shot. Massive, massive numbers. You can just see bombs, craters everywhere. And in fact, I've seen pictures taken just recently of these very same areas. Still, bomb craters everywhere. things just won't grow over the bomb craters. Some of them are also fish pools that are using those. And in fact, a lot of these bombs are still going off. It's very dangerous over there. And the good news is most of us got to come home. Here's Gary Dickers giving us a proper sign as he's flying his last mission, getting ready to come home. But not everybody came home, and I'd like to show this picture when that helicopter crashed on a rescue mission. 6 really good guys died. So here's an analysis of the war. This comes right out of some North Vietnamese writings. And in fact, you can read this quote. This is how they feel about the trail. They call it the Trung Song Road. That's their term for it. I'll let you read that. I think that says it all. And like I said before, what was their political objective? It was to unite the two countries under their control, and by using the Ho Chi Minh Trail as they did, they achieved their political objective and won the war. So what can you say? More power to them. So that's a quick and dirty 30 minutes on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We could go on forever. We could talk about other operations, and we could talk about the rustics in Cambodia. And there's so many now. We'll do that at the bar, where we really should be having these stories anyhow. But I had the honor of serving in the 23rd TASS for 2 years, 72 through 74. Worked with a lot of great buds. Worked with a lot of great commanders, guys like Howie Pearson. Follow him anywhere, even there. Now that's a great commander. What can I say? So that's 30 minutes on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Cool.
I'll make just a couple more comments.
We only if you come up here.
Darrell, yeah, I'll switch that back.
Go, where are we going? Back to you? You want to see us out? Let me see if I can make it go back. There you go.
That's gross.
Oh, I do. No, uh-oh, we're going to have rebuttal now from the general. I'm in trouble. Uh-oh. Here we go.
3 quick comments.
Okay.
I forgot about B-52s, not because they weren't trivial, but on the 11th and 12th and 13th of May in 72, General Abrams gave General Hollingsworth all B-52 strikes in the theater, I guess. We had one around Anlock every 50 minutes for 36 hours. You're right about the boxes, except that we all cheated a little bit and brought them in closer than what we should.
We cheated?
And one of the neat things with the SAC guys then was that they captured a prisoner who said that my regiment is now outside and they are in the bomb hole craters left from the B-52 strike yesterday, and they know that you will not strike again in the same place. The B-52s were apparently already on the way from Guam, and through various Air Force communications, they diverted one into the same box that we had hit yesterday and apparently decimated the remainder of an entire North Vietnamese regiment. There were 36,000 North Vietnamese soldiers and 2 tank regiments and a whole bunch of anti-aircraft involved in that particular thing. That's the first item. Secondly, maybe you did better, maybe we did better on the Ho Chi Minh Trail than we thought. In 1990, I went to Moscow. And in Moscow, I was then in my second career, and I was over there talking to them about leadership and management and the change from their society to a democratic commercial society. And we were taken out to dinner, and we had dinner with 4 members of the Politburo, one of whom was the Soviet logistics advisor in Hanoi during 1971, 72, and 73. And he said, we could not have continued to supply them for another 6 months. We were putting in 12 people on the Ho Chi Minh Trail and getting out 1 at the bottom. For every 12 rounds of ammunition, we were getting 1 out of the bottom, and he said we couldn't have gone on there for very long. So we were doing a little bit better. At the end of the war, we had the Kissinger Peace, and I was one of 9 colonels who were the U.S. representatives to the Joint Military Commission. Each one of us had an area, and we had counterparts. I had a North Vietnamese colonel, I had a South Vietnamese guy, I had a Viet Cong guy, and I had myself. And the North Vietnamese colonel and I had an interesting discussion. We were talking about the war and so forth, and I said, Colonel, you got to realize, and by the way, his English was at least as good as mine, and he knew more American history than I did. He'd also get the front page of the Washington Post and the New York Times somehow every day. I got the Pacific Stars and Stripes once a week. That was the thing that I had. And I said, but I said, you must remember that you never won. During the entire 9 years, you never won one battle above platoon level. And he said, Colonel, you're exactly right, and it doesn't make any difference. We won in your newspapers. And he, of course, was right. So those were interesting kind of things. Now, my last story about Vietnam is I went over on a semi-clandestine mission about a year after all of us were out of there to check on, see how the Southern Vietnamese Army was doing, and Air Force. And there were 4 of us, all of whom had spent, like we had, a couple of years with the Vietnamese during the time. And I went out to 3 Corps. By the way, we checked all their weapons. They were in better shape than I'd ever seen. The Vietnamese Army was doing a good job. They did a good job in An Loc. They'd done another thing. And there's a book recently out by Louis Sorley called Reassessment of ARVN that categorizes this really well. But as I went into the 3 Corps area, I was talking to the Corps commander, General Minh. And he said, we know that you have promised to come to our aid if the North Vietnamese violate the treaty. And he said, they are already violating it. They are moving their forces, and here is where I want you to put in some arc lights when they start to invade. And I said, General, I don't think, I said, I can't speak for the United States, but I'm not sure there will be any more U.S. air power. And when I said that, his face changed from a dark bronze color to just as white as your shirt down there. And he was absolutely shaken. Our mission was to report back on what they needed. And we said, they're taking care of their equipment, they're taking care of their people, they're very low on repair parts, and they're very low on artillery ammunition, and they need some helicopter help very soon, and we reported that. So my feeling is, to tell you the truth, in 1974 and early 5, 1 B-52 strike and about $500 million worth of ammunition, and I think that the North Vietnamese would have given up. But in any case, thanks again, and that's for my personal opinion.
God bless the grunts, huh? God bless you. One more comment. You guys have heard me say this before, and I want to say it again. You've got to remember what history is. It's not what happened, it's what's recorded. Now, with a lot of talks today about people that have been writing books, how many of you have not yet written a book? Get with it, okay? Capture that history. Gary Dickers, you got to do the fact story of the Saw guys. You got to do it. It's got to be done. And with that, I'm done.
Great as usual.